Okay, it is another glorious Wednesday in paradise. It is September 21st. And needless to say, as I was talking to my colleagues on the screen here, my birthday is on Friday. And I am looking forward to some breaking of a little bit of bread, but more importantly, having some interesting sharing of alcohol. And pontificating about how we're going to change the world. I just came back from Salt Lake City, Utah, and I was blown away by their plans and their courage. Beautiful place, lots of plan. I'll share more about it in a minute. But welcome today. And if you haven't been with us before, we are going to get rolling here after we ask our own John Sibley Butler to play some music.
I'm going down to the Greyhound station. I'm gonna buy a ticket to ride. I'm gonna find that lady, 2 or 3 kids to sit down by her side. Ride till the sun comes up and down, round about 2 or 3 times. Smoke a cigarette on the back seat. Try out my songs to the people I meet and get along with it all, where the people say, oh.
Woo! Welcome, welcome, John Butler. How are you, sir?
I am doing absolutely fine. Everything is going on. The big thing, of course, was the Queen ceremony. And you know, when I was had an appointment with President Bush, we did a lot of things at the embassies. And I would tell people nobody can do ceremony like the English. Now I go into one embassy and it's come in, I go to the English embassy, your coat is taken, you know, in route step, it's hung up in route step and you escort it to where you need to be. And nobody can do a ceremony like the English, period.
I agree.
So I was looking at the ceremony but more important, it represents a passing of time. It also represents a time when, as we look at the world today, how the world has changed over the last 200 years. And it also represents the whole idea that we still know how to celebrate something of greatness. And I think that's good. We do, in America, we know how to celebrate the Super Bowl. But more importantly, in the world today, there's so much that's going on. And if you look at what's going on with the war simultaneously, with the nuclear weapons threatened simultaneously, if you look at what's happening with the quote inflation, that'll go away. But what I enjoyed about the ceremony was that it's like going to a college graduation with all of the robes, and you say, wow, some things never change. They did this 1,000 years ago. So in all the sadness of the world, for me to look at ceremony like that, it was a good infusion into the brain, and I really enjoyed ceremony.
Oh yeah, I agree. Llewellyn King, how are you, sir?
Very well, thank you. I'm in good shape, thank you.
And you are sitting where today?
I'm sitting in my living room in West Warwick, Rhode Island.
Also known as East Texas.
To you, it is known as East Texas because Austin is a great confusing place for you. East Texas. China is East Texas. India is East Texas. Indeed, the ceremony which Johnny so enjoyed, the burial of Queen Elizabeth II, took place in East Texas. I think you know that.
That's right. That's right.
It's sounding like
just across the little creek called the Atlantic Creek. So we have a great guest today, David Inbar. How are you, sir?
I'm great, thank you. Delighted to be here.
Absolutely, and I do sense a little bit of an accent that is probably from the great.
Probably from East Texas. You're quite right. It's a kind of reverse imperialism by the sound of it.
That's right. That's right. That is.
But
exactly.
it does the comments that John was making about the ability to create ceremonies that are both in some ways spectacular, but also meaningful.
Yeah,
You're right. It's one of the talents that the UK, the British nation has.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of ceremonies there every day. It's more a part of everyday life, not on that scale, but
mhm,
of everyday life. And it
yeah,
kind of,
You're so right, David. They have the set and they have the players, and they can summon them up.
yep,
And of course, the uniforms, the wonderful costumes.
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, let me introduce you, David, formally for those that don't know you and are listening and watching and will be listening and watching. David Inbar is co-founder and CEO of Dejalytics. He's going to be with us for about an hour. Looking forward to the sharing. Prior to Dejalytics, David was founder of 2020 Strategies. He was also Senior Director of Innovation Lab and Big Data Products at Pervasive Software, one of the Austin success stories. And he was a VP of Sales and Marketing at Data Junction, another Austin success story. I'm sure he did many other things before that, but I stopped at Data Junction. And David holds a bachelor and a master's in engineering from the University of Cambridge. I've been there, beautiful place. I used to work at a campus, a factory from Philips Electronics across from the university, making pagers of all things. And he also has an MBA from London Business School. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Thanks, Andreas.
Absolutely. So David, Dejalytics, I love the name. I've always loved the name. I know what it is, but tell us, and for those listening, what is Dejalytics all about, and what is your keen focus short term?
Will do. So, Dejalytics, the principles that participate in it, are all about analytics, machine learning, AI, data. We chose a number of years ago to focus on wholesale energy markets. So ERCOT, PJM, CAISO, MISO in the US, eventually overseas. And specifically, we decided to focus on predicting wholesale prices in these markets. And we did that because we saw this macro trend of climate change on the one hand, more and more renewables on the supply side, and more potential electrification and changing on the demand side. So forecasting in those markets, both long-term and short-term, has become harder. And we have more and more tools with which to tackle that problem. But we decided that we really should try and build some products that would do that and that would go beyond pure forecast. So yes, we forecast prices day ahead, next 15 minutes, next 3 hours. But then on top of that, we use some of our software engineering background and engineering to build applications, cloud-based, that directly control pieces of equipment and the operation of generation units, peaker plants, potentially batteries as well, in a way that normally a human trader would try and optimize what they're doing. And we want to automate that. So the vision is, in the future, hundreds of thousands of millions of devices hanging off the grid, and they all need to self-optimize. And one of the ways they need to do that is to either minimize cost or maximize margin.
Right.
So David, you're talking about the Internet of Things, of course, everything that hangs and provide the data back to you, the revolution in connectivity, as we like to call it. And through this revolution in connectivity, there's just tons and tons of data that's released. So that we can be a modelers, we can be a mathematical modelers, not only a predictive modelers traditionally, or modelers that's almost 100% correct, especially when we apply the Internet of Things of the ability, for example, to do agriculture. There's no need for anybody to be around when the field is plowed. There's no need for anybody to be around when the seeds are dropped, and there's no need to be anybody to be around when the crop has concluded. Same thing with the flying of airplanes. Same thing with cars. My question is, as we move to the Internet of Things and the data comes off, and if you're looking at what we call in academia big data, and then I look at your business, how do you create your theories to partition the data for the predictive models? Otherwise, it's just basically, data in and data out, or as we used to say in the old days, garbage in and garbage out. So let's say that I am in the field of I don't know, petroleum, right? There are lots of data, and I'm in the field of creating software. How do you say what variables are important as you build the model? Or do you let it just go do all the correlations and then from the correlations build the model?
Oh, you know how to get straight to the guts of the problem, don't you?
Well, I think we're in the same kind of area. I use big data in all my research.
Right. So it's great. I mean, you talked about garbage in, garbage out. The danger with these kinds of predictive models and solutions that automate activity is major errors, not just garbage out, but disaster out if the models themselves are not well constructed, well constrained, and the data continuously monitored as well. So two parts to your question. I mean, one, how do you decide which variables? There's no substitute for domain expertise, right? You can't just pick what you think would be a great series of variables and throw them at the machine, because the models will get built, but what they produce will indeed be garbage. And actually, it's interesting that the range of variables to choose from is pretty easy once you have domain expertise. It's the conditioning of that data before you present it to the machine learning algorithms where we spend most of our time. And there's no substitute for human judgment and call it not so much intuition, but maybe even creativity on taking data and reshaping it so that it actually can be useful to these machine learning processes.
Yeah,
so unsupervised learning, that's not us.
What is very interesting to me, I gave a talk at NASA called Big Data and the Future of Predictability. What's amazing to me is how, if you look at a network variable, and when I look at my stuff and how data move, I can use stuff from how data move in the human body, how diseases move in the human body. It's amazing how, if you just look at a networking variable, how when you draw it out, a social network, a physical network, and a biological network looks the same. You almost think that there's something about, we don't need the normal curve anymore. And you're right, without a theory of how it works, then it becomes garbage in and garbage out.
Right.
But the human element of experience, of theory, by the way, theory that goes back hundreds of years, not just what we've known in the last number of years, right, can drive the insights into the model building. I think it's absolutely fascinating. But like all things, we really have to understand that the big data are just big data. It's like the old census, data. And the theory, like you said, you really have to put the conditions as you create your models to sell in the market. And as
So another way of saying this is really what matters is the right data, right? And that takes several forms. And part of it is the right variables. Part of it is eliminating noise, right? So if you've got a time horizon of what you're trying to predict of, say, 3 hours, what you need to do is cut out the data that fluctuates every 5 minutes, because that'll create and longer term things not interesting. So those are all critical. And then once you have these things up and running, what do you do when your data flows are interrupted? Because you talked about being 100% right all the time. Well, data availability is not 100%.
Right.
There are either interruptions, despite the robustness of modern communications, and there can be data, what do you call it, sort of damage to the data as it's traveling, or attenuation of the data in one form or another. So you have to have almost supervisory monitoring going on to make sure that what you're feeding is the right data to the right model.
Right.
Right.
And we like to say just statistically minimize the sum of squares from the predictive line and keep moving.
Right. Exactly.
That's statistically, if we say, if I'm trying to predict and I think it's linear, I'm gonna minimize the sum of squares. And it's a great thing when everything falls on that predictive line, but as we know, it won't do that. And then this is
Yes.
where we have the unexplained stuff. Yeah.
Most interesting things are nonlinear, and their interactions are
Right.
extremely complex.
Mhm, mhm. Llewellyn?
Yes, who are your customers, David?
So our customers are traders themselves that can use what we produce to help them take positions or make better decisions. They are, as I mentioned, generators, peaker plant operators that want to optimize the way that their plants run, so that literally think of what we produce as a trader in a box that is indefatigable. It is just wide awake 24 hours a day, and it's literally reassessing every single piece of data every 1 minute. And
We've just seen, David, we've just seen energy markets turned upside down by an externality that nobody anticipated, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This has had an effect on almost every aspect of energy. It's tightened the price of oil, tightened the price of natural gas, and caused a shortage of uranium and a shortage of many essential minerals used in the production of energy, and particularly in the expansion of the electrification of the electric system. How does your data deal with such an enormous intrusion of an externality?
yeah, we were wondering about that ourselves. And it's very interesting. So far, the models have held up very well. I think in terms of what we're seeing right now, we had a little bit of a dry run here in Texas in February 21, and with the big freeze, and that created natural gas prices that are way higher than even the ones now. The models worked very well, actually, which was good, because of course, for a lot of these situations, the historical data does not represent what you're seeing now.
Right.
How do you say the models worked very well if you had the aberration of Storm Uri? How did your model adjust to encompass that and to allow for it?
Well, it was interesting because one of the key inputs to models for the generation units is the price of natural gas itself. So we saw the models turn on the natural, say to the natural gas peaker plants, turn on actually several days before things started to get really tight. They were up and running, which was good. And when the real-time price drops in between, which happens here in ERCOT in particular, price will go negative, but the model said, don't stop, keep going, because these are short-term fluctuations. And then there came a point about a day or two into the big freeze where they said, turn off the turbines, because even though you can collect $9,000 per megawatt hour, the price of natural gas has gone so high that actually you'll make a loss running at these prices.
Right.
So they worked. You could
So
see-
David, help the audience understand the benefit. So I'm a utility, I have generation units. I do a deal with you, I get the software. What am I gonna get out of it? How, layman's terms?
So for the business guy, the CFO, it goes straight to the bottom line. For every 100 megawatts of capacity that you have, which is not that big, but for every 100 megawatts capacity that you have that our system is managing, you get at least $1 million a year in additional profits, pure profits, going to the bottom line.
Do you like that, Butler? Does that sound good to you, Butler?
Yeah, I think so. I think what we have to understand when we say that the models are predictive and we're dealing with human behavior, it's like finance. A lot of these models come from physics, right? And we know that physical stuff is easy to predict. I mean, if you look at Newton's ideas, if you look at, I mean, a rock will not change its mind, right? And what physics has taught us is that we can model certain things in the universe. So if you look at finance, if you look what we're doing now, as David said earlier, we understand the limit of mathematical modeling when it comes to human behavior, because we can have the theory, but the humans can change their mind, okay? And when humans change their mind, then it becomes less predictive of what we expected. So when he says we've got to really, really understand the conditions, we have to really, really understand the conditions. So what that means is that when the utility companies get the data and they look at it, they're going to assume certain kind of things. They might assume no earthquakes. They might assume, no hailstorms and all of these things. And when one understands that the models that we use in big data, although are related to physics, but it is the human condition that changes their mind. And this is why the stock market will always have crisis, because we don't have the human behavior predictors in the stock market. So the scholars at the University of Chicago, they took models of physics and created modern finance. But remember, people will always change their minds. So these models are so good that David is doing, because it is what we have. It is what we have to look at how human beings interact. So everybody knows that a CEO might go crazy. Everybody might know that everything else might happen. That's why David said you have to really, really condition what you do, because the mathematical models outside of physics, a rock won't change its mind, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I could walk in and say, oh, my gosh, the stock market, there's a recession going on. There's a depression. I go back and kill all of my orders.
Yeah.
And then the person walk out and said, who left this paper here on the table from 1929?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think it's important to understand that as we do these things, it's very, very conditioned.
Right. So David, real quick, if the grid anywhere, it's pretty, pretty predictable for the most part, weather driven,
Right.
demand driven, right? The generation actors are known, they're pretty predictable. They do annual maintenance on their equipment. Sometimes they're forbidden to do maintenance at certain times of the year because of demand and so on. But what would happen, and how important would it be to the system or to the players in the system to get familiar with your software if the volatility of the system would increase because of electric vehicles and solar panels and energy storage in the home? Is that a good thing for your business?
Yeah, it's what we've predicated the business on, that things were going to get, and they do get, more volatile. So volatility is good for us because it places an extra burden on utilities, on generators, and actually on big industrial users as well. Mm-hmm. And the prices in the markets are the end result of all those other things that are going on. Mm-hmm. Right? It's that change in demand, it's that change in behavior, it's the constraints in the grid, which allow more power or less power to flow in any direction.
Right.
And that's changing in real time, it's changing continuously. So the need to automate the response to that and to manage, to optimize, becomes less and less something that you can purely leave to human beings. Because you either have to have an army of them, or they have to be incredibly wise and consistent, and they have to be awake 24 hours a day, all days of the year.
And I can see what the data says, whether it's picking stock market or the utilities, they're going to do what their friends suggest.
Exactly.
That would be a network of individuals that they depend on, and they would do what their friends suggest. It's just like when you go the data with Penland's work from MIT on social physics and picking stocks, where he did all the mathematical models. Said, how do these people really, traders really pick stock? Where they depend on a network of friends. In your business with utility, the question becomes, what should we do with the coming crisis? And they're going to depend on a network of their friends. Whereas automated, it's going to depend upon the data that you have. This is why when you're flying an airplane, Llewellyn, and the GPS says, do this, or you do this. I know it's not called GPS. You just have to follow and learn how to fly the plane. No matter what you think it's doing, you have to go with, right, the input of the data, right?
Right.
And I think what David, what you have is, what you're saying is, the more we automate, the more we take out the human phenomenon. And then you remember, you used the word volatile, right? And which just comes right out of physics and the stock markets, right? So I think that's what makes this feel so exciting, having all the data to try to predict what it is. And by the way, when you predict it right, the enterprise, utility, they really, really benefit. There's no other way to benefit.
Yeah, it makes a big impact to their
Huge impact. Exactly right.
profitability.
Llewellyn,
David, I'd like to get effects on the size of your company. How much sort of measurement? Number of people, turnover, number of customers? How would I measure your company if I was writing an article about it?
There's some interesting measures. We're a small number of people, so still, less than 10 people, and not that the value of what we do is very high. So, sort of assets being managed. Something like we're a startup, so around 500 megawatts, but in conversation to take on a lot more. And then separate from that, the pure price forecasting, PJM being used by a handful of traders on day ahead. And so we're still small, but growing fast. The value is being understood better and better. The audience we sell to is very skeptical, right? Understandably so. They've been doing things a particular way for a long time. There's a lot riding on this. So we make our service and system available for them to test, and that can be extended time periods.
Where do you get your raw materials before your computers have crunched them? Where do you get your weather forecasts and your basic prices and your expectation of reserves of fuels, etc.? Your demand curves that you might expect.
So the usual thing, the grid operators, the ISOs like ERCOT and PJM publish a lot of data, some of it every 10 seconds, some of it every hour. And that gets you some of the way there. But then you independently, you need prices of some of the material from other sources. You need multiple weather forecasts and load forecasts to actually provide and sort of arrive at relationships between these different views of what's going to happen in the next hour, the next day, the next few days, because There are multiple different models for that. NOAA, of course, is ultimately the best source of weather models. And the granularity of those these days is improving gradually, but it's still somewhat coarse. It's interesting when going back to John, you talk about human behavior in the markets. We see the traders, particularly on day ahead, we can tell when they're biasing towards going beyond what the data merits, or either underbuying or overbuying. And a lot of the time they're doing that because they're taking a position on how fast a weather front is crossing a big load zone. So that's one of the toughest things, is the weather forecasts have improved a lot, but they're still subject to quite a lot of variation.
In my experience, utilities operate their own risk analysis desks, or I imagine that the ISOs and the RTOs do the same thing. How does your prediction, how does your data fit in with that? If they are doing risk analysis and they're buying a data service from you, are they complementary or contradictory or duplicative?
Well, what we provide is another piece of intelligence for them. The degree to which they use it, depends on how long they've been using and how comfortable they are with it. So their risk assessment, is really important, but they get to rely on it more and more over time. That's the nature of these kinds of solutions.
Thank you. A final question: how did you come to be in this line of work?
Somewhat random. Just I've been in the software and data management business for decades in Europe and in the US. I just came across somebody who was working on battery storage in ERCOT and presented to me the issue that they face with real-time prices in ERCOT, which those prices, they're not like the stock market, they change every 5 minutes, so not so real-time, but they can swing wildly, and you get these spikes that go up to thousands of dollars per megawatt hour, and they drop into negative. And they said they were trying to predict that, and they were looking at this and said, it's totally random, we can't predict it. And I said, well, give us some data and let's see if we can get started on this. So that's how it happens.
And I think you said the great word real time. It's the whole idea that you have a mixed model, right? You have the standard data, you got data that goes back 120 years, which is the standard data, and then you got all of the data coming off of all of the Internet of Things that's hooked to that, all of that's producing data. And as we used to say in Louisiana, my dog can smell a hurricane coming, 2 days in advance. So if we move from that and you use these mixed models, I think this is more of a comment that the value add is that it's real time. There's nothing like real time prediction. And this is the great value add that we've had in predicting weather. And what's interesting is that the European weather model might predict a different model than the American model, right? That means that, oh, by the way, your English is so perfect. I wish that you learned how to speak English, real American English. But when you look at the English model, a prediction of weather patterns, you look at the American model, then they become very, very close. So what that means is there's some kind of validity that's going on between the different models. And the mixed model, would say that, you got to somehow, I think, take advantage of understanding human behavior. And like you said, how they think about things. And Llewellyn, you could talk about the airplane pilot that didn't believe the instruments and what happens. And it's the same kind of idea when we're predicting. Of course, an airplane is much more lethal, but there's no data like real-time data. And in the last, since the Internet of Things, that is what has made the difference. And a lot of the things that we do, how cars move, just predictive models, real time is the word. That's very, very impressive.
So one last thing, if I may, Andreas and John.
Yeah.
So John, you would be interested in this. For our day ahead models, we actually build new models, literally hundreds of models every single day.
Right.
Based on the coming day. And then, and they're for different locations because we have nodal pricing and all those things.
Mhm.
And we have another process that then picks the most likely or best model out of those batches of models to actually run and publish for the day.
Right.
So it's a complete closed loop system. There's no, it runs automatically. And it's very interesting to see the changes from one day to the next. And with that goes what I call a hierarchy of models, right? Because you have forecasts that feed into further forecasts and models that feed into other models. So all of this can get, and that's true for an airplane navigation system and everything that has to go on there too. And it is very interesting to see how all that works.
Yeah. So explain something, David, for the audience again. So the wholesale market has different structures in the United States. There are 10, 11 trading regions. There are some regions that are sort of monopolies, no trading going on. ERCOT is a trading region, balancing authority, frequency regulator in one entity. All the generation that gets to be used in the ERCOT market gets sold to our ERCOT through the 15-minute forecast of 50 minutes ahead or day ahead, a forecast of my generation to be online. And we used to have 5 zones for pricing that had to do with geography of Texas, right? And then ERCOT in 99, 2000 went to a zonal model where there are now 550 zones. And so the pricing that you're predicting is not one price, but it's a price for every node, or is it for every, or how does it work? And then, so explain that for the audience. And then also, what would happen if ERCOT decided to go to 10,000 nodes? Would that complicate things? Would that explain that too?
Okay. All right. Thank you. So yeah, you're right. The nodal pricing model that ERCOT introduced a while back, and that probably ERCOT is the most advanced in that area. PJM has it to some extent too. And literally hundreds, if not thousands of points at which prices are set every 5 minutes. And those are based on the local mix of demand, supply, and transmission constraints in and out of that point, physical point. And you can see that ERCOT has a real-time interactive map with hundreds of dots on it and colors. Love to show you that, but you can go look at it. And so our models are for each of those locations. So wherever a generator is connected to the grid through a substation or whatever it may be, our model is specific to that location, has to be, because how the prices are set at that location depends on how easy it is for the electricity that's being generated to get out, or if it's or if it's a load and needs to take in electricity, how far does that electricity have to come before you can get it? So our models are node specific, and then they're asset specific as well. They're tied to how fast can this unit ramp up? What's its heat rate under different conditions? How long does it have to stay switched off after you've stopped it? All those factors go into it. And also, even the price of natural gas is specific to a location. So you get gas at Houston Ship Channel, but then it's got to be piped through to where you're using it. There you go. Thank you, Andreas. And if you go bottom right there to where it says standard gradient.
Mhm.
Click on the standard gradient little arrow there and have high gradient. Okay, it's a good illustration here. I mean, there's one single price covering most of Texas right now,
Mhm.
somewhere in the $70 per megawatt hour range. And then you see that little spot there,
Mhm.
which actually has too much electricity. Okay, and so the prices are lower in that spot. And at this point, they're not actually going negative, but they can. I was looking at this earlier today, and that same spot had negative prices about an hour ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Fascinating.
See, David, the way I understand this isn't that fascinating? But in physics, they call it a structural hole. That is, you have the prices that's gonna generate, given certain conditions, as needed, right? But if all of a sudden it's needed somewhere else, a structural hole develops in that structure and it goes somewhere else. So that's what physics calls a structural hole in the universe. So you might have a whole network of things, and I'll look at that as a network of prices, right?
Right.
And that network of prices, however, is what I call a structural hole because the conditions are different because of the price. Now, I'm just saying this because it's amazing how the study of things with big data, right, are converging with the physical sciences and the social sciences, or what I call just good old statistics, right, which I love. Now, I'm not going to talk much because I would have to charge Llewellyn King tuition. He's really paying attention. I would have to send him a tuition bill. But I'll just say this. I find it so fascinating about the methodology, right, of how the prices themselves will conjugate around the conditions, and then there's a structural whole that, in the universe, you say, well, are things self-organizing in the universe? Well, they're self-organizing because they have structural holes. In your business with utilities, they're self-organizing because of the prices will fluctuate.
Exactly.
And I think the more the Internet of Things is added, the more volatile those structural holes will become.
That's right.
Now, I just say this, David, I don't charge much in my consulting. I'm not.
Wait a minute.
I've never seen Llewellyn so attentive. I've never seen Llewellyn so attentive to what I was talking about. And David, I saw that you had somebody writing in the background, but CMG Consulting, we're not that expensive if you want us to come in and talk about these things.
I wouldn't be inclined to pay, given the paucity of facts in your information. You might do better teaching philosophy or something, because you have a pea of an idea and a mattress of words.
I like that. I love that. That's priceless.
Please ignore Dr. Butler. He had times like this. He didn't take his medicine this morning.
No, I did.
You did? Oh my God.
But it's real interesting.
He took too much medicine.
Prescription.
It's real interesting to see how we analyze things now with the big data, because
I'd like to
yes.
Go ahead, Llewellyn.
without the benefit of John's instruction, I can understand it. We have 3,000 utilities in the country. Most of them, but not all of them, are in some kind of regional transmission organization, an ISO. But you have, for example, a large swath of the West, which is not yet in an RTO of any kind. They're trying to get in one. They probably will join the Southwest Power Pool. It's not certain.
For Florida.
Yeah, you've got large areas. Are you giving are your customers advantaged over those that are not in a position to avail themselves? You can't expect every little utility to buy into your service, or can you?
Well, that's a good question. So yes, those that have it have an advantage, and there's no question. So the question then becomes, what happens when everybody's using it?
Right.
Right? Then nobody has an advantage in theory. And then what's the value? Well, it becomes kind of more an insurance and an essential good at that point.
Yeah.
But I don't think we'll ever get to that. I think the reality is everybody uses it in slightly different ways. Some people use it more effectively than others. And the really important thing, the big idea, I think, is that the grid has to become more self-managing. I know you've discussed in the past this whole issue of human operators that are managing the grid and trying to keep it on course. And it's getting bigger and more complex and more dynamic and more volatile. And unless there's more of this kind of self-optimizing, self-managing process going on, on the grid, at the edges, wherever, it can't be managed centrally.
Yeah.
Besides that, what are you learning, David? Are you learning, for example, that a utility with a high gas generation base load is advantaged over one with some other primary source of their electricity? And
well, it's interesting to see the current situation. Let's say you contrast, you've got California, you've got Texas, and you've got New England, right? And Texas at this point probably has the most diverse mix of generation of anybody, and that's more complex, but it seems to be supporting their continued lower price for consumers than most everybody else. New England is very heavily dependent on natural gas. It used to be more dependent on coal and fuel oil, and they've phased those out. And in the current conditions, New England is suffering horribly. They're suffering horribly, partly because they've got physical constraints on the amount of gas that they can pipe in because they've resisted building more gas pipelines. And so a lot of the gas has to come in by ship on via LNG. And of course, that's subject to world prices. So consumers in the Northeast are seeing their bills double and triple right now. And they're going to have a hard winter. And consumers in Texas are relatively fortunate. Consumers in California face some other constraints, partly because they've been retiring their nuclear and their gas plants probably prematurely. So they're more exposed as well because they have a lot of solar, but it's, they're a thin, narrow state. The sun passes over relatively quickly. So, they get too much sun and then they get not enough. So every grid or market is pretty different and unique. But I think in general, I'd say diversity is better.
And of course, you want to say, if you buy my product, then you're doing the best thing for your consumers. That's
There
what
you
it's
go.
Yeah.
There's the marketing consultant.
Right. But be careful to talk about New England when Llewellyn is around. We just don't say bad things in comparison to Texas. We have learned that through our interaction with our bed load of ideas that's in our mattress.
No, I wanted to bring it up particularly for the Rhode Island contingent.
There you go.
well, I was looking at the chat function on the computer because I like to have something to do when Johnny's talking.
I love you too.
We have a viewer who asks, when you say the signal is turn off the generator, it's not profitable, what about the social obligation to keep the generator going? And I find that an interesting question, because when you're dealing with the utility industry, you're not dealing purely with a business entity. You're dealing with a business entity that has been granted certain rights and entitlements to operate in a natural monopoly with an obligation to the consumer. that other units, for example,
But you know, I would argue that, you know, I get the conundrum there, but you know, in the Texas ERCOT market, that doesn't matter, right? Because it's a market. If you're a vertically integrated utility, a muni, a co-op, then you definitely would do the right societal thing. But in a market, there is no element of societal thing in the market.
So
Yes, this is,
Well,
obligation to consumers, you know, people coming.
If the, I mean, the bottom line of that is if you're a generator and the prices are negative, you are paying the market to consume your generation. Why would you do that?
Well, this is not the question. The question is in a time of crisis, and David raised it in relation to the situation during Uri, when the
Yeah, we that's exactly what happened. We almost had a shutdown.
hold on.
that's
David said that during Uri, when the prices got so high for gas, that the signal was to turn off generating because you were producing. And that's the only question. Is there another obligation, a social compact that utilities implicitly have with all of us who consume electricity?
and yeah, I mean, I won't take a position on that, but in ERCOT, it's a great question here from Matthew. What happened in ERCOT is, of course, a lot of the generators ended up with huge bills because they did keep running or were required to keep running.
mhm.
And we're now all paying those bills off over the next 20 to 30 years, is really how the costs of doing that end up being.
That's because they
Socialized.
monetize the debt.
Right.
Yeah.
To the consumer. If you had in ERCOT day-ahead pricing, maybe you wouldn't have had some of that. One of the arguments for the ISOs is that it provides a mechanism to day-ahead pricing and takes some of that pure energy market shock out of the system.
Well, yeah, and ERCOT does have day-ahead pricing. It didn't, unfortunately, deal with this exceptional scenario where there simply wasn't supply, period.
So here's the essence of what happened in ERCOT that really trumps all this thinking that was inevitable. In 2008, the EPA under the Obama administration decided to do a ruling and a change for startup generation units to switch from natural gas to electricity. So in order for the gas pipelines and all these things, they switch all that infrastructure. And so that meant that wherever the grid was feeding those startup motors for the pipelines across the infrastructure, they should have been redlined as critical infrastructure that could never be shut down. And AEP, Encore, and Centerpoint, for some reason, didn't make that marking. So when ERCOT was calling to turn off grid resources to balance the grid because generation wasn't showing up and so on and so on, and the load was missing, they were turning off critical elements that were needed to fire up the new generation in the pipelines. And so ERCOT itself was telling the utilities to shut, down load that impacted the ability for the new generation units to come live. And they were basically, killing themselves.
So David, would your modelers have corrected that? So he's presenting a typical situation where people are making decisions based on what they think is rather than what the data is saying. If you were feeding it automatically, quote unquote, would you think that could have been avoided or could have been enhanced not to be avoided?
Not in the case of Uri.
Okay.
Models would not have helped because the models don't incorporate what's happening in detail on the gas supply infrastructure that was freezing up.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, hindsight is 2020. when this proceedings and the discovery of this came to bear, everybody was really shocked and blown away that nobody had thought of or caught or prepared for it.
Right. You know, as a Southern Louisiana boy, it was just natural to me to go through that.
Yeah.
With the storms, yes. You know,
But it's worth saying that they have now noted all this, and now they know not to do this again.
Right. They're now ready for a
For
lot
the next
more-
storm. Yeah.
for the next storm. It'll be a lot. We're all hoping, we expect it'll be a lot better.
yes,
Yeah.
we hope-
I was going to ask you something, David, maybe a final point to make here, and then we'll switch it to something else, a final question. But if you know, it seems like ERCOT more and more is hitting peak. You know, and the spring jumped straight into a summer. Now summer is maybe cooling off a little, thank God. And a lot of people had really terrible expectations that we were going to have a lot of brownouts. We almost did couple of times, right? And demand response came to save the day multiple times. Do you see that volatility with the edge of the grid shifting, becoming, you know, more of the normal with the intermittence of the wind and the sun? And then how does your model, you know, benefit from that, or helps me as a generator for that?
Yeah, so good question. I mean, on the model side, yeah, the model gives you better earlier warning of some of these conditions locally. So that's helpful. I think I agree with you. I think we were lucky this summer. It was an exceptionally hot summer with rising demand, not only from air conditioning, but from you know, Bitcoin mining. Happening on a big scale in the state that was not really in the models, in the ERCOT's models. But fortunately, the wind kept blowing. If the wind had not performed, we probably would have had some rolling blackouts.
Right.
No question.
Yeah.
And
So David, what is next for you? The next 6 months, the next 12 months? You know, unicorn, IPO, what's looming? What's in front of you?
We'll just get more engaged with more customers. That's really the priority right now. And it's always interesting because everybody runs their operations differently. You would think, well, they're all one market, they all operate much the same way. No, they don't. They have other goals and objectives or constraints. And some of the questions, you know, in the chat box mentioned, you know, municipally owned utilities are very conscious of their obligation to consumers to keep electricity on no matter what, right? So they take that into account as well. But I do think one of the big things we'll be looking at is extending what we do more and more to batteries, because, you know, batteries are going in, that's growing. They're still a relatively small part of the mix, but they're getting more important. And the early days of just using them for sub-second, 2 or 3 second adjustments or contribution to maintaining frequency on the grid, you know, that, you know, there's a limited requirement for that.
Yeah.
So more and more, the economics of these batteries are going to depend on their ability to arbitrage effectively.
Yeah.
So it's fairly easy to say, oh yeah, we'll charge up at night, and generally that's a good time. But you know, when do you discharge to make the most money?
Yeah.
And that's going to become harder and harder because the periods of high prices are getting shorter.
Right.
And, you know, less easy to anticipate.
Yeah. Makes me wonder, what is the future of transactive energy, virtual power plants? Would that really come to bear? You know, we've had the capability in Austin for a long time, and the utility has never wanted to do it. because there is a big segment of the population in the low income charity types of customers, multi-dwelling, that they are afraid of real-time pricing, and and so those that subscribe to, which you have, just fixed rates and protect the end customer from the potential madness of what we saw during Erie, and companies like Greedy that went out of business because they had a straight through pass on real-time pricing to consumers, and they closed, they had to close down, they had to shut down.
Yeah, but I agree. It's a challenge, but at the same time, we definitely need to move to more of a paradigm where demand adapts to supply, as opposed to the traditional supply always adapts to demand.
Yeah, demand
So at the margin, we have to have more dynamic, more more intelligent demand shaping, let's call it, or demand response, not just when things get really tight, but on a much smaller scale. I mean, somebody like an HEB, they could turn off their AC or their freezers for 10 or 15 minutes, wouldn't make any difference. They could potentially save themselves money and save the grid at the same time.
Yeah.
I can also envision a time when the price of goods in the store are changing real time based on demand.
Oh,
so when I walk in,
John, I lived that in Mexico, in Argentina, in Brazil, on hyperinflation in the last 20 years. It's not pretty.
It's not pretty at all. But what happens when I walk into a store, if the refrigerators are selling, the prices are, and hey, because everything becomes digitized, right? And we have the ability to do that. Then I could walk into a store, everything is real time. Llewellyn can walk into a store and they'll tell me, I'm sorry, Dr. Butler, your credit card real time, we don't want you as a customer anymore. We do not want you as a customer. We have to put your bill on Llewellyn King. And I'll say, that's my friend. He would be happy to do that. So I think as we move forward, then the products of things in establishments might also change in real time. And I think would be very, very interesting, because if when we have floods here in Austin, I mean the wet vaps go straight up, right? So why not digitize that? And so when I walk into a store to buy a pencil, right, if there's a whole stack of them, right, nobody's buying, they're cheap, but if they're going down, I pay more for it. Oh, what a great country! Everybody got to work hard so they can buy things. What a great country.
All right.
I'm not as bad as I sound, and I'm not as good as I look. That's all I say.
David, thanks for being with us. We wish you success. Stay in touch. We'll be talking. Gentlemen, any parting words?
No, I think this is a very important part of a very rapidly changing electric picture. The demand for electricity, which you raised, Andres, is going to double by 2050. Same time as we're trying to get rid of carbon emitting fuels, and you can't do it. It's a rock and a hard place, something that's got to give. And data will be a big help in managing the pressure, but it will not reduce the pressure totally. It will not alleviate it.
Yeah.
Somewhere somebody's got to build an awful lot of generation or curb the rate of use and the rate of growth of electricity in the transportation sector.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and I think you're right at the center of the interaction between demand and electricity. I think we're moving to a society now where we all depend on electricity to do everything that we do, what was very, very different than when I was a kid, right? I did not have a electronic date book or those kind of things. I did not hook on right to the grid that should be there, especially when we look at our wireless electricity. I think the most important thing for all enterprises has always been, how can we serve the customer on the one hand, but reduce our prices on the other hand? And it might sound crazy that I might walk into a store and everything is changing based on demand, but we certainly will have the tools to do that. It would be a very, very interesting world in the future. And thank you very much, David. And David, I'm gonna give you an assignment. I want you to go read a book entitled Models Behaving Badly. Right.
Sounds great.
Daniel Derman, D-E-R-M-A-N. That is not a suggestion. That is an order.
Yes, sir.
David, thank you.
Professor.
John, take us away.
Oh, yes.
Hold on.
Peace of mind. Where's the good times that we should be sharing? Past this way, only memories remain. Tomorrow, I thought our dreams would be enough for a while, and all the good times that we had. Hey, we had love, that was all that we had, and now that is the same.
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank
Hey,
you.
David, do you have a comment for the last question here from James?
I was just looking at it. Let me get back to James on that. That's probably fairly technical, but you know, there are pilots going on. I love
This
it.
must be the Tesla pilot with Encore or something like that.
Could be, but I will look at it and
I don't know.
James,
I don't know the number of the bucket.
I'll reach out to James and let him know.
I gotta go. I've got a phone call coming in. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you,
Bye.
Llewellyn.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
everybody.
Send me the
Great talking.
tuition, Llewellyn. Send me the tuition.